where two great rivers meet, where the golden steppe kisses the blue sky, a world was born. Imagine a dawn, not the one we see today, but an ancient, primordial one breaking through the sands of time. Like the whisper of the wind carrying the dust of millennia, so here, in the heart of the earth, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers forged their history, a new chapter began. This is not just a place on a map. It is the cradle of civilization, a land whose mysteries still haunt minds. Who could have imagined that on this fertile soil, blessed by water, something so grandiose would grow that it would cast a shadow on eras to come? The breath of time is felt differently here. It is thick, saturated with the scent of sun-baked clay and the distant aroma of blooming gardens. Here, at the dawn of human history, the first urban civilization arose, weaving its complex web of clay bricks, laws, and dreams. The whispers of centuries echo from every grain of sand, from every stone resting in the sun. What does this land hold within itself? What makes it so special, so eternal? Listen carefully, and perhaps you will hear the echo of those who lived here long before us. Silence precedes change, and time begins to flow faster again. Where two great streams meet, where the golden steppe kisses the blue sky, a world was born. Imagine a dawn, not the one we see today, but an ancient, primordial one breaking through the sands of time. Like the whisper of the wind carrying the dust of millennia, so here, in the heart of the earth, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers forged their history, a new chapter began. This is not just a place on a map. It is the cradle of civilization, a land whose mysteries still haunt minds. Who could have imagined that on this fertile soil, blessed by water, something so grandiose would grow that it would cast a shadow on eras to come? The breath of time is felt differently here. It is thick, saturated with the scent of sun-baked clay and the distant aroma of blooming gardens. Here, at the dawn of human history, the first urban civilization arose, weaving its complex web of clay bricks, laws, and dreams. The whispers of centuries echo from every grain of sand, from every stone resting in the sun. What does this land hold within itself? What makes it so special, so eternal? Listen carefully, and perhaps you will hear the echo of those who lived here long before us. In that distant age, when the stars were closer and the world seemed boundless, a new center of attraction emerged on the banks of the Euphrates, at a bend where its waters became wider and calmer. This was no mere settlement, no random cluster of huts. It was preordained. For hundreds of years, perhaps millennia, tribes of people had been cultivating this land. They built simple mud houses, cultivated fields, and watched the rivers flow. But it was here, in this blessed place, where moisture nourished the earth and the sun bestowed warmth, that something greater began to take shape. Consciousness was awakening. The idea of a city was born. The first settlers, whose names have been lost to time, were farmers and herders. They lived in harmony with nature, subordinated to its rhythms. Their lives were simple but meaningful. They built canals to channel the waters of the Euphrates to their fields. They observed the movement of the sun to determine the time for sowing and harvesting. Their beliefs were closely linked to the forces of nature, the fertility of the land, the bounty of the rivers, the threatening sky. They revered the gods presiding over these elements, offering them modest offerings. But gradually, from this peaceful coexistence, a new reality emerged. The population grew. Craftsmen appeared, potters, weavers, blacksmiths. Trade began to develop. Rare goods arrived from other lands, and in exchange, grain, wool, and clay products were exported. With the growth of the population and the complexity of social life, the need for order, laws, and governance arose. It was then, at the bend of the Euphrates, that the core of the future great city began to take shape. Imagine the first buildings, not grand temples but simple, sturdy houses, built of sun-dried clay bricks. Their walls were thick to protect against the scorching heat of the day and the cool of the night. The streets were narrow, winding, sometimes covered in dust, sometimes mud after rains. But this simplicity already suggested a purpose. The layout of houses, workshops, and meeting places had been planned. The central square, the heart of the future city, began to take shape. People gathered here to exchange news, negotiate deals, and celebrate festivals. The first temples, albeit modest ones, dedicated to the main gods, likely arose here. Their walls were decorated with simple patterns sculpted from clay. Priests, the keepers of knowledge and traditions, played an increasingly important role in the life of the community. This period was a time of slow but steady development. The city grew not only in breadth but also in depth. Social strata formed. Chieftains, military leaders, and administrators emerged. Years passed, generations passed, and each contributed to the development of the new settlement. They built new houses, strengthened the walls, and improved the irrigation systems. Particular attention was paid to the river. The Euphrates was a source of life, but also a force of nature that needed to be harnessed. People learned to predict floods and build dams and dikes to control the flow of water. This required collective effort, organization, and discipline. It was this collaborative effort, aimed at the benefit of the entire community, that laid the foundations of statehood. Gradually, the settlement at the bend of the Euphrates began to acquire characteristics that distinguished it from ordinary villages. Its inhabitants began to recognize their uniqueness, their connection to this special place. They gave it a name which, like a whisper on the wind, began to spread throughout the surrounding area. This was the birth of Amaru, a word that did not yet carry the echoes of a great empire, but already foreshadowed its future. With each new generation, with each new construction, the city became more organized, more complex. Its inhabitants began to feel part of something greater than just family or tribe. They were citizens of Amar. This new identity, born on the banks of two rivers, became the foundation for future achievements. Amar's rise was not swift, but inexorable, like the sun's movement across the sky. It was like a seed planted in fertile soil, which, under the gentle rays of the sun and life-giving moisture, slowly but surely sprouted, one day blossoming into an unprecedented flowering. And in this slow but sure growth, one could sense the breath of history itself. Amaru, once a humble settlement, blossomed into the majestic Babylon. The city, the heart of a mighty empire, pulsated with life. Its name echoed with great deeds, a promise of unshakable power. The sun, like a gold coin, glided across the azure sky, illuminating the majestic walls built of clay bricks, soaked in the sweat and perseverance of generations. The air was filled with the aroma of spices wafting from the bustling bazaars, mingling with the scent of fresh clay and dust stirred by thousands of footsteps. The streets of Babylon were living arteries, flowing with a stream of people, goods, and ideas. Here one could encounter merchants whose faces were scorched by the sun of distant lands, artisans whose hands knew the secrets of metal and wood, priests whose gaze was fixed on the stars, and warriors whose tread was firm and confident. The city hummed like a giant beehive, each busy with their own task, contributing to the common good. The sounds of hammers striking metal, the clink of coins passing from hand to hand, the voices of merchants vying with each other to extol their wares, merged into a single symphony of life. The royal palace occupied a special place in this splendor. It towered over the city like a mountain, its walls adorned with blue tiles that sparkled in the sun like precious stones. Its halls echoed with the voices of kings whose power extended far beyond the visible world. Decisions that changed the course of history were made here, and the destinies of nations were determined here. The palace was more than just the ruler's residence. It was a symbol of Babylon's power and grandeur, its unshakable foundation. Besides the palace, the city was famous for its temples. These enormous structures dedicated to the gods were centers of spiritual life. Priests performed their rituals here, offered prayers, and sought to understand the will of heaven. The fires in the sanctuaries never went out, their flames reflected in the eyes of the faithful, lending a solemn expression to their faces. People came here to find solace, strength, and hope. The temples were places where the earthly and the divine intertwined, where the boundaries of the world seemed to thin. Babylon was not only a city of power and faith, but also a center of knowledge. The arts and sciences flourished here. Babylonian sages studied the stars, recorded their observations, and constructed complex mathematical models. Their knowledge was passed down from generation to generation, enriching world culture. Astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, the Babylonians achieved remarkable success in all these fields. Their cuneiform tablets, covered in symbols, still preserve the secrets of ancient knowledge, waiting to be read again. Life in Babylon was in full swing, but beneath all the bustle and grandeur, a calm was palpable. It was the calm of established order, the calm of a city that knew its own strength and its place in the world. In the evenings, as the sun set, painting the sky crimson and gold, the city was transformed. The light of the lanterns lit in the streets created whimsical shadows, and the air was filled with silence, broken only by the occasional voice and the rustle of the wind. At such moments it seemed as if the city itself was pausing, sinking into a sweet slumber before a new day that would bring new accomplishments. It was during this period, when Babylon reached its apogee, that its grandeur became the subject of admiration and legend. Built on the banks of two rivers, the city became the embodiment of power, prosperity, and civilization. Its walls, its temples, its palaces, everything exuded history, strength, and beauty. Babylon was more than just a city. It was a symbol, a dream come true. This was a golden age when the empire seemed to know no bounds, and its heart, Babylon, beat in unison with the pulse of the entire world. It was a time when the very word Babylon became synonymous with grandeur and power, a time when this city became a true pearl of the ancient world, whose glory was destined to endure for centuries. In the very heart of Mesopotamia, where the Euphrates and Tigris intertwine, a miracle towered, its shadow stretching far beyond the city. It was more than just a structure, but a symbol of ambition, faith embodied in stone, the great ziggurat. Its base, square and unwavering, seemed rooted in the earth itself, absorbing the strength of millennia. With each level rising toward the sky, it became thinner, more graceful, as if reaching out to meet the gods. Its terraces, like giant steps, led upward to the very edge of the world where, as the ancients believed, the divine dwelt. The sun's rays glided across its clay bricks, playing with shadows and light, transforming the colossus into a living, breathing being. At midday, when the sun was at its zenith, the ziggurat seemed ablaze, radiating a heat that could be felt even from a distance. At night, under the blanket of stars, it became an enigmatic silhouette, sharply outlined against the velvety sky. It seemed as if the universe itself was looking down, reflected in its monumental beauty. Each brick, carefully fired and laid, told its own story. The story of the craftsman whose hands wrought this miracle, the story of the workers whose backs bent under the weight of their labor, the story of the priests whose prayers ascended to the heavens. It was the creation of the human spirit, daring to touch the divine, to build a bridge between earth and heaven. The ziggurat was more than just a temple. It was the center of life, a place where the secular and the sacred intersected. Here, ceremonies were held, sacrifices were made, and rituals were performed to appease the gods and ensure the city's prosperity. Its summit, crowned by a sanctuary, was where the priests held their nightly vigils, observing the movements of the stars and interpreting their secret signs. The noise of the city, the bustle of the streets, the hum of voices, all of it remained below, at the foot of the sacred mountain. Here, on the terraces of the ziggurat, a special atmosphere reigned. The air became purer, thoughts clearer, and the soul calmer. The wind, gently hugging the stone walls, carried with it the scents of incense and herbs, creating a unique aroma that penetrated the very heart. With each new level, ascending ever higher, one felt oneself moving away from earthly concerns and approaching eternity. It was a journey of the soul, a metaphor for spiritual ascent, the pursuit of perfection. Children coming here with their parents gazed wide-eyed at the gigantic steps, dreaming of one day reaching the very top. Adults, looking up at the sky, felt both humility and pride at the human mind's ability to create such grandiose structures. The architectural concept embodied in the ziggurat was truly revolutionary. Nothing like it existed anywhere else. It was a bold decision, challenging both nature and tradition. The absence of right angles, the smooth, ascending lines, the sense of constant upward movement, all this created a unique image. It seemed as if the ziggurat wasn't grounded but hovering in the air, supported only by the power of its concept. For many centuries, the ziggurat stood unshakable, testifying to the grandeur of Babylon. It survived wars, floods, and dynasties, but its image remained unchanged, imprinted in the memory of generations. Even when its walls began to crumble under the onslaught of time, its legend lived on, inspiring builders and dreamers. The Great Ziggurat was more than just a building. It embodied the human striving for the sky, for knowledge of the unknown, for contact with the divine. Its mystery still excites minds, compelling us to admire the genius of the ancients and reflect on the eternal truths they sought to capture in stone. And everyone who stood at its foot felt something ancient and eternal awakening within them, reaching upward toward the light. A change of era approaches like a breath of wind across the steppe. Babylon, a city built from sand and clay, knew no peace. Its greatness seemed to have reached its apogee, but the human soul always strives further toward the impossible. It was then, at the end of the 7th century BCE, when the empire's power reached unprecedented heights, that a legend was born that would transcend centuries, a legend of paradise gardens spreading where it seemed impossible for life to grow. Imagine the heart of Babylon, not bustling markets, not majestic palaces, but something else, something that captured the imagination of even the most sophisticated inhabitants. These weren't just gardens, but an entire ecosystem built against all the laws of nature. The imagination conjures up images, stepped terraces reaching into the sky, each concealing a world within. A world of greenery, flowers, and murmuring water. A world that seemed straight out of the pages of myth. These gardens weren't just decoration. They were symbols of power, wealth, and, most importantly, engineering genius. The city, located in hot, arid Mesopotamia, suddenly found its own oasis. And not just any oasis, but a lush, blooming paradise where trees cast their shade on the scorching earth and flowers exuded wondrous fragrances mingling with the scent of the damp earth. Legend has it that these gardens were created by order of King Nebuchadnezzar II. He ruled Babylon at the height of its glory, and his wish was law. But the reason he wanted to create such a marvel is shrouded in romance. It is said that his wife, Queen Amytis, a native of the green, hilly lands of Media, longed for her native lands, for the lush vegetation, the cool shade of the forests, the scent of flowers, sorely lacking in the flat, scorching Euphrates Valley. And the king, loving his wife, decided to fulfill her deepest desire. He ordered a garden built for her that would remind her of home, a garden that would become her solace, her refuge, a garden that would show her that even in the heart of the desert, a piece of paradise could be created. And the craftsman, obeying his will, set to work. Imagine the scale of this undertaking. It wasn't just planting trees and flowers, it meant creating an entire mountain of earth, stone, and brick. And not just any mountain, but a multi-level structure that would support the weight of earth, trees, bodies of water, and of course, people. Each level had to be carefully planned, each terrace designed to withstand the colossal load. The builders worked day and night. Their hands were calloused, their backs bent under the weight of their labor. They used sturdy stone blocks and clay bricks impregnated with bitumen for waterproofing. Every stone, every brick was in its place. And gradually, layer by layer, an incredible structure began to emerge before the eyes of the astonished Babylonians. It was something unprecedented, not just a building, but an entire artificial mountain crowned with lush greenery. Terraces were arranged one above the other, creating a cascading effect. With each new height, a new view, a new landscape opened up. From above, it seemed as if the earth itself had opened up to give birth to this wondrous garden. The steps leading upward were wide and comfortable, paved with stone. They wound around the terraces, creating the feeling of walking through a real forest. Trees grew on either side of the steps, their crowns intertwining overhead, forming a living tunnel. Flowers of every hue and shape adorned every corner, roses, lilies, tulips, irises, their scents mingled, filling the air with an intoxicating fragrance. But the most astonishing thing wasn't the mere presence of greenery. What was most astonishing was how this greenery was maintained. After all, Babylon is a place where rain is rare and the sun blazes mercilessly. How did water reach the tops of these terraces? How did it nourish the roots of the centuries-old trees whose trunks seemed to rival the columns of the temples? This is where the true genius of the ancient builders was revealed, an engineering ingenuity that surpassed anything known before. They didn't simply build a mountain, they created a complex irrigation system, a system that raised water from the Euphrates to dizzying heights. It was a true mystery. How did they do it? How did water, so heavy and unyielding, overcome gravity? Contemporary sources are sparse on details, but legends and subsequent discoveries suggest it was something grandiose. Perhaps they used a system of chains and buckets, turned by people or animals. Perhaps there were complex pumps powered by water or wind. Or perhaps it was a combination of various mechanisms working in unison. Imagine the spectacle. Beneath the scorching sun, amid the clay buildings of Babylon, a green mountain rises. Streams of water flow down its slopes, nourishing the plants. Above, like a waterfall, the water cascades from one terrace to another, creating a mesmerizing effect. The sound of trickling water, mingling with the rustling of leaves, was music to the ears. Queen Amytis, strolling through these gardens, must have felt right at home. She saw familiar landscapes and inhaled the scent of her favorite flowers. For her, this was more than just a gift. It was a symbol of her husband's love, care, and boundless power. He had achieved the impossible for her, transforming the desert into a blooming garden. But these gardens weren't just for the queen. They became a true landmark of Babylon. People came from far and wide to see this wonder. They climbed the steps, admiring the lush vegetation, listening to the birdsong which seemed to have found their own little corner here. They drank cool water from the numerous springs, feeling relief from the heat. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon became the embodiment of a dream. Dreams of paradise on earth, a place to escape the harsh realities of life where nature and human genius merge. They were a testament to what man is capable of when driven by a great purpose and boundless love. And even today, when only ruins remain of these gardens, their legend lives on, inspiring us and reminding us of the grandeur of the past. Silence seemed to envelop Babylon before movement began. The air froze, filled with the premonition of change, and time, like a held breath, began its swift passage once more. The legend of the Hanging Gardens, of a paradise created for the queen, captivated the imagination. But was it truly so? An illusion woven from words, or a tangible reality rising above the clay roofs? Historians tend to believe that the Hanging Gardens, if they existed, were more of a grand engineering project than a mystical vision. Queen Amytis herself, daughter of the king of Media, longed for the green hills of her homeland. Babylon, spread out in a flat, hot valley, was far from her home. Her husband, Nebuchadnezzar II, who reigned in the 7th century BCE, sought to offer her solace by recreating a piece of her home in the very heart of his empire. Imagine these gardens, not just a flower bed, but a multi-level structure rising above the ground. Terraces like the steps of a giant staircase rose one above the other. Each terrace was covered with a thick layer of earth held in place by massive brick walls. Trees, shrubs, and flowers grew on these walls as if on pedestals. The tallest trees, their crowns touching the sky, provided shade, while shorter plants formed living carpets cascading down. Water, the lifeblood of the desert, was key to this miracle. How was it transported to such heights? Legends speak of complex systems of pipes, perhaps made of lead or baked clay. The water was drawn from the Euphrates, the mighty river that fed Babylon, and lifted to the upper levels by ingenious mechanisms. Perhaps these were Archimedes' screws turned by hand or by animal power. Or perhaps they were more complex pumps operating on hydraulic principles. Imagine the sound, the murmur of water, endless and soothing. It flowed through canals, cascading from one terrace to another, creating artificial waterfalls. This sound, mixed with the rustling of leaves, the scent of flowers, and the singing of birds, which had undoubtedly been brought here, created an atmosphere of peace and luxury. It was an oasis in a stone city, a place where one could forget the scorching sun and dusty streets. The architecture of these gardens is also striking. The foundations were likely massive to support the enormous weight of earth, trees, and water. Bricks, fired to the strength of stone, were the primary building material. Bitumen and reeds may also have been used for waterproofing, preventing moisture from penetrating the structures below. Each level was designed to create the illusion of a natural landscape, a mountain covered in greenery. Nebuchadnezzar, a ruler renowned for his grandiose construction projects, could have truly realized this dream. His reign marked Babylon's golden age, a time when the city became one of the most magnificent sights in the ancient world. He built temples, palaces, and city walls. The Hanging Gardens would have been the pinnacle of his architectural ambitions, a symbol of his power and his love for the queen. But there is another point of view. Some scholars believe that the Hanging Gardens, as described by the ancient Greeks, were actually located not in Babylon, but in another city, Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. They point to archaeological finds that, in their opinion, match the descriptions of the gardens, but are located significantly north of Babylon. In Nineveh, during the reign of Sennacherib, a century before Nebuchadnezzar, grandiose structures were also erected. Imagine this different city. Built on hills, it might have been better suited to the creation of multi-tiered gardens. The engineering solutions may have been similar, but the landscape may have facilitated their implementation. If so, then the legend of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon may have been mistakenly attributed to the capital of the Chaldean Empire, while in fact referring to an Assyrian miracle. Regardless of their location, the Hanging Gardens became a symbol of human ingenuity and the pursuit of beauty. They embodied a dream of harmony between nature and civilization, a place of refuge from the harshness of the world. This dream, enduring through the ages, continues to live in our imaginations, compelling us to search for traces of this lost paradise. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Gardens may have existed in Babylon, but they were less grandiose than described in legend. Or perhaps it was a combination of various structures that created a similar effect. History, like ancient ruins, often preserves its secrets, leaving us with only echoes of its former glory. Regardless, the image of the Hanging Gardens remains striking. It evokes images of lush greenery, murmuring water, and cool shade. It's a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit is capable of creating beauty and striving for perfection. And this beauty, even if only a fleeting illusion, left an indelible mark on history. Water, the source of life, has always been a precious commodity in sun-baked lands. Where the Euphrates and Tigris rivers birthed civilization, water meant prosperity. Without it, fertile lands turned to dust and cities to ghostly shadows. The ancient peoples of Mesopotamia understood this better than anyone. Their history is the story of the struggle for control over waterways, the story of engineering genius born out of dire necessity. Imagine endless expanses parched by the heat of the day. Every stream, every spring was worth its weight in gold. People learned to collect rainwater in enormous reservoirs dug deep into the earth. They built dams of clay and stone to control the turbulent spring floods. These first steps in harnessing water were simple, but they laid the foundation for future great achievements. With the emergence of the first cities, such as Ur and Lagash, the need for water increased exponentially. It was needed not only for drinking and irrigating fields, but also for crafts and to sustain life in growing settlements. The era of canals had begun. Large and small, wide and narrow, they pierced the earth like veins, delivering life-giving moisture from the rivers to fields and cities. This was labor that required incredible effort. Thousands of people toiled under the scorching sun, digging, shoring up the banks and creating channels for the water. But the true flowering of engineering occurred during the time of Babylon. The city, the heart of a mighty empire, required a reliable water supply, and Babylonian engineers outdid themselves. They didn't simply dig canals, they created entire water systems. Water wheels, driven by animal power or even wind, raised water to higher levels. Water mills, which we often associate with later eras, may have also found their use in Babylon, helping to irrigate gardens and fields. Particular attention was paid to water purity. Complex filtration systems using sand, gravel, and coal were built. This produced potable water, which was critical for public health. Imagine how the residents of Babylon, tired of the heat, could enjoy cool, clean water delivered to their homes thanks to the incredible efforts of engineers. Now let's return to the legendary gardens. If they existed at all, they would have been unthinkable without a complex water supply system. How could water be transported tens of meters uphill to nourish the plants growing on the terraces? Babylonian engineers likely used pumps, perhaps based on the principle of the Archimedes screw, or complex systems of gutters and aqueducts. Every watering required precise calculations and tireless labor. History tells us that during dry periods, when rivers ran dry, the inhabitants of Babylon would resort to constructing temporary dams and canals to redirect the remaining water. These were true feats of engineering, requiring the coordination of many people and a deep understanding of hydraulics. Sometimes, to provide water to remote areas, gigantic reservoirs capable of storing enormous volumes were built. These reservoirs were not simply pits in the ground, they were carefully designed structures protected from evaporation and pollution. They served as a kind of water bank, guaranteeing the city's supply even in the most difficult times. This passion for controlling water, for delivering it where it was needed most, was more than just a technical challenge. It was deeply connected to the beliefs of ancient peoples. Water was often associated with the gods, with fertility, with life itself. Manipulating water was a way to approach the divine, to harness the forces of nature. Imagine the sun's rays reflecting off the smooth surface of the canal, the splashing water filling the air with a refreshing sound. This was the music of life for the people of Babylon. It was the sound of their civilization, the sound of their ingenuity. The engineering genius of antiquity, embodied in canals, dams, and water supply systems, was the invisible foundation upon which Babylon's greatness rested. Without it, there would have been no lush gardens, no flourishing fields, no mighty empire. It was the water of life, and the ancients knew how to tame it. Above the smooth surfaces of canals reflecting the endless sky, where days gave way to nights and the stars charted their eternal paths, the Babylonians sought answers. Their upward gaze was more than mere curiosity. It was a profound desire to understand the order of the world, to unravel the plans of the gods who, they believed, guided the movements of the celestial bodies. Astronomy in Babylon was more than just a science. It was a philosophy, a religion, a part of their very lives. Every reflection on the water, every change in the moon's appearance, every movement of the heavenly bodies, all of it mattered. Imagine the night sky above the scorching land of Mesopotamia. Thousands upon thousands of stars, like diamonds, scattered across the velvety darkness. Among them are familiar constellations that the Babylonians had long since learned to recognize and name. They saw in them the figures of gods, heroes, and mythical creatures. These patterns in the heavens were a kind of map for them, a guide through life. Babylonian astronomers were observers, patient and tireless. They spent long hours, sometimes even nights, with their primitive but astonishingly precise instruments, recording every movement, every shade of light. They created complex calendars based on the cycles of the moon and sun. These calendars were more than just timekeepers. They determined the times of sowing and harvesting, the timing of religious holidays and important ceremonies. The life of the city, its rhythm, its well-being, all were closely linked to the celestial dance. When the moon waxed, filling with light, it symbolized prosperity and abundance. Its waning, on the contrary, could cause anxiety, reminding us of the fragility of earthly existence. Particular attention was paid to eclipses. These frightening yet fascinating natural phenomena were perceived as omens. Babylonian astronomer priests meticulously recorded them, attempting to discover patterns and predict their occurrence. They believed they could detect and interpret signals sent by the gods. This required not only observation, but also a deep understanding of mathematics. The Babylonians were skilled mathematicians. Their number system, based on the sexagesimal principle, allowed them to perform complex calculations. Their astronomical observations were remarkably accurate for their time. They could predict the movements of the planets with a high degree of certainty. This knowledge wasn't simply abstract, it had practical significance. Astronomers served at the royal court, advising on matters of state, predicting favorable days for military campaigns or important construction projects. The stars were not only a guide in the night, but also a source of wisdom, a guide to action. In their clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform, we find evidence of these observations. Each entry is a tiny piece of a mosaic assembled over centuries. They describe the rising and setting of the sun, the phases of the moon, and the visibility of Venus and other planets. They knew of the existence of comets, though they could not explain their nature. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation, becoming the basis for further discoveries. Gazing at the stars, the Babylonians felt a connection to something greater than mere earthly life. They saw in the cosmos a reflection of their own society, its order and harmony. Astronomy helped them bring order to chaos and find meaning in a changing world. It was this pursuit of knowledge that drove them forward, despite all the difficulties and challenges their great civilization faced. In the silence of the night, beneath the shimmering canopy of the heavens, the Babylonian sages continued their eternal dialogue with the stars, weaving their mysterious movements into the fabric of their lives and their history. This was a wisdom born of observation, patience, and a profound respect for the incomprehensible forces of the universe. Each new star revealed to their gaze, each new pattern discovered in the sky brought them new understanding. In the shadow of the great, the path from greatness to decline, celestial wisdom, woven into clay tablets, illuminated Babylon's path, but even the brightest stars could not predict the coming changes. The city, built on two rivers that became its lifeblood, felt the pulse of the world, but this pulse grew increasingly uneven. Majestic ziggurats reaching skyward seemed impregnable fortresses, but even they were not immune to the breath of history. New powers arose, the rulers of the lands changed, and the shadows of the conquerors grew longer. At times, the very air above Babylon seemed to thicken, filling with foreboding. The rustling of palm trees in the royal gardens, once a soothing lullaby, could now seem like an anxious whisper. The rivers that had fed and protected the city for centuries now flowed without asking permission, their flow as inexorable as the passage of time. Consider the power that surrounded this city. The kings, seated on their thrones, surrounded by pomp and wealth, believed in the inviolability of their order. Every day was filled with rituals, ceremonies, and displays of power. Majestic processions moved along the wide streets, their footsteps echoing loudly off the stone walls. Incense smoked, the aromas mingling with the scent of dust and the scorching sun. But even in these moments of supreme glory, somewhere on the periphery of consciousness, lurked the awareness of fragility. Greatness, like any flower, has its time of bloom. The conquerors, whose names had not yet been carved on granite slabs, were already preparing. Their gaze was riveted on the radiance of Babylon, its riches, its strategic position. The wind blowing from the east carried not only the dust of the desert, but also news of new hordes, new ambitions. The history of Babylon is not only a chronicle of triumphs, but also a chronicle of losses. The great walls, seemingly impregnable, one day trembled under enemy assault. The skilled engineers who erected such wondrous structures were unable to stop time. Astronomers who studied the movements of the stars saw in them only order, but they could not predict how this order would be disrupted. The city, which for centuries had been the heart of a great empire, now felt its blood slowly draining away. Great kings, whose names even children know today, once ruled over vast territories. Their decrees reached the farthest corners of known lands. They built, expanded, and strengthened. Their will was law, their power unquestioned. But even the most powerful rulers are not eternal. Their dynasties changed, their empires crumbled, and each such transition was accompanied by pain, loss, and the redrawing of borders. The scent of change hung in the air. It wasn't the sweet scent of flowers that filled the gardens, but a sharper, more tart scent that foreshadowed a storm. People living in those days sensed it. Their eyes might have revealed not only calm, but also a hint of anxiety. Children played in the streets, unaware of how soon their world would change. Old people, sitting outside their homes, recalled bygone times when greatness seemed unshakable. A city built on clay and water, it had always been connected to nature. Its strength was drawn from the rivers, its life depended on the harvest, its beauty was reflected in the sky. But nature is fickle. Floods could destroy, droughts could desiccate. And just as nature changed, so too did the human world. External forces, once only whispered about, now became apparent. The shadows of the great ones who once ruled began to thicken. New conquerors, whose names were not yet known, were already knocking at the gates. Their dreams of power and wealth were as grand as those of their predecessors. History, always striving for the new, began its next turn. Babylon, once the center of the world, began to feel its influence weakening, its walls becoming less of a defense. The city's grandeur, its famous gardens, its majestic temples, all became a lure for those who thirsted for power. History teaches us that nothing lasts forever, and even the most brilliant dawn is followed by dusk. Babylon, whose glory resounded throughout the ancient world, now stood on the threshold of change. Its wealth, its knowledge, its culture all attracted attention, aroused envy, and the desire to possess. The city, once a symbol of power, was now preparing to test the force of a foreign will. The hubbub of life in Babylon continued unabated, but somewhere deep within its soul, in its very heart, a premonition was already brewing, a premonition that the days of its undivided dominion were drawing to an end. The greatness achieved over generations could be lost in an instant, and that moment, like any great change, was inevitable. A change of era approaches like a breath of wind across the steppe, carrying with it the dust of distant roads and the whisper of future events. Babylon, once the heart of the world, sensed this breeze of change, at first timid, almost inaudible, then increasingly insistent, as if foreshadowing a storm. The city's grandeur, its golden roofs reflecting the sun, its bustling markets brimming with exotic goods, its mighty walls, seemingly immovable, all this became a magnet for strangers. From distant lands where the horizon merged with the sky and the soil was harsh and fertile in its own way, people came. They carried ancient tales in their hearts, but they dreamed of something new. Their gods were different, their customs were alien, but their desire for power and land was as eternal as the flow of the Euphrates itself. They were not simply conquerors, but also guardians of their own traditions, ready to bring them to a foreign land, blend them with what already existed, or even replace them. Among them were the Assyrians, whose military prowess was renowned far beyond their northern dominions. Their warriors, seasoned in battle, clad in armor like dragon scales, pounded their boots on the dusty ground as they approached the gates of Babylon. Their kings, like Tiglath-Pileser and Sargon, were ambitious and relentless. They saw Babylon not just as a city, but as a symbol of the power they desired to seize. Their eyes reflected the flame they carried with them, the flame of war, but also the flame of order they promised to establish. They were like a storm that sweeps away everything in its path, but in its aftermath, the land becomes more fertile and life more orderly. But Babylon's history knew other comings and goings. Let's recall the Chaldeans, a people who rose from the swamps of the south, a people who managed not only to regain their independence, but also to once again elevate Babylon to unprecedented heights. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, one of its most famous kings, the city flourished again. His reign, beginning around 609 BCE, ushered in a new golden era. The Chaldean dynasty that ascended the throne brought with it a vigor and aspiration for greatness that had seemed lost. Nebuchadnezzar, this great builder and military leader, was a man whose ambition knew no bounds. He didn't simply rule, he created. His gaze was fixed on the sky, and he wanted his city to reflect that celestial splendor. It was under his rule that new walls were erected, even more imposing than before, encircling the city in a wide ring of defense. The Ishtar Gate, adorned with blue glazed bricks depicting bulls and dragons, became a symbol of his power and mastery. It was more than just a gate, but a triumphal entrance to the city, destined to captivate everyone who passed through. And of course, the Hanging Gardens. Even if their existence remains a subject of debate among modern historians, their legend has lived on for centuries, fueling the imagination. Nebuchadnezzar is said to have built them for his wife, Amytis, who yearned for the green hills of her homeland. Imagine multi-tiered terraces soaring like steps to heaven, covered in lush greenery, flowers of unprecedented beauty, and trees whose branches drooped laden with fruit. Water, raised by ingenious mechanisms, fed these gardens, creating an oasis in the midst of the scorching Mesopotamian plain. It was a marvel of engineering, the embodiment of a dream of paradise on earth, a place where nature and human genius merged. But Babylon's greatness lay not only in its buildings, it also lay in its people, their knowledge, their wisdom. Babylonian priests and scholars were the guardians of ancient knowledge. They observed the stars, recording their movements, predicting eclipses, and compiling calendars. Their astronomy was not just a science, but also part of their religion, a way to understand the plans of the gods. Their cuneiform tablets, kept in their libraries, contained knowledge of medicine, mathematics, law, and literature. They were like beacons illuminating the way for other peoples. However, like any great kingdom, Babylon could not remain at the peak of its power forever. External forces, once mere distant shadows, now took on flesh and blood. History, like a river, always strives for a new channel. And this new channel came from the east. The Persian Empire, rising under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, became the new dominant power in the region. Cyrus, a man whose name became synonymous with wisdom and justice, was more than just a conqueror. He was a statesman who understood that true power lay not only in the strength of arms, but also in the ability to govern conquered peoples while respecting their culture and beliefs. When the Persian army approached Babylon in 539 BCE, the city was no longer the invincible giant it had once been. Internal strife, economic difficulties, perhaps even the fading of its former spirit, all these weakened it. Cyrus the Great entered Babylon not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. According to one version, he diverted the Euphrates River, damming its waters, thus allowing his troops to enter the city through the dry riverbed. Other sources say the city surrendered without a fight, opening its gates to the majestic Persian king. Either way, this was the end of Babylonian independence, but not the end of Babylon's history. The Persians, having come to power, did not destroy the city. On the contrary, they preserved many of its institutions, its administrative structure, and its cultural heritage. Babylon became one of the capitals of the vast Persian Empire, continuing to play an important role. Persian kings, such as Darius I, even restored some of its magnificent structures. However, the center of power had shifted. Now the heart of the empire beat in other cities, Susa, Persepolis. Babylon remained important, but it was no longer the only, no longer the primary one. It was a time when conquerors became guardians, and guardians became part of a new, wider world. Dynasties replaced one another like waves on the shore. After the Persians came the Greeks, led by Alexander the Great. Alexander, enraptured by the grandeur of Babylon, planned to make it the capital of his own empire. He even began work on restoring the Etemenanki Ziggurat, the very one that may have inspired the legend of the Tower of Babel. But his life ended too soon, leaving the city and its dreams in limbo. Then came the Seleucids, followed by the Parthians and the Romans. Babylon, once a powerful empire, itself became an object of power and influence. Its population changed, its languages mingled, but even as its political power waned, Babylon remained a city of knowledge and tradition. Its priests continued their observations of the heavens, its sages preserved ancient texts. This period of shifting dynasties and cultures was a time of trials, but also a time of adaptation. Babylon, like an ancient tree that bends in the wind but does not break, endured these changes. It saw empires crumble, new kingdoms rise, gods and customs change. But it retained its essence, its spirit, its memory. It was a time when history, like a master weaver, wove the threads of different peoples, creating a new, more complex picture of the world. And in this picture, Babylon, even having lost its former dominance, continued to shine like a precious stone, a reminder of the greatness that can be achieved and the changes that are inevitable. Babylon's last breath. Time is inexorable, and even the strongest walls, seemingly eternal, succumb to its destructive force. The city, once the heart of mighty empires, now felt the cold breath of change. A new age was dawning, and with it a new ruler. Persia, whose dominions stretched from distant mountains to the blue sea, cast its gaze upon ancient Mesopotamia. King Cyrus the Great, whose name became synonymous with conquest, approached the walls of Babylon. The city, accustomed to grandeur, sensed no impending threat. Life went on as usual. The bazaars bustled, the lights of palaces reflected in the Euphrates, children laughed. It seemed nothing could disturb its age-old peace. But shadows were gathering on the horizon. Cyrus was no ordinary conqueror. He came not only with a sword, but also with intelligence. He saw Babylon not simply as booty, but as a symbol that could strengthen his own power. Legend has it that he used cunning. Instead of storming the impenetrable walls, he ordered the waters of the Euphrates diverted. The river, which had watered the city and protected it for centuries, suddenly became its traitor. Imagine, a vast river flowing through the heart of an empire suddenly dries up. The earth greedily absorbs the moisture, exposing its bed. And then, while the city is immersed in festive bustle, while the guards are relaxed, Cyrus's army enters along the dry riverbed. Step by step, like a ghost, the army moves across the exposed stones. The silence that precedes a storm fills the air. The morning was ordinary, but the air was unusually cool. People awoke, unaware that this day would be the last for their free city. When the first rays of the sun touched the golden domes and majestic walls, they saw them. Warriors in alien armor, alien banners, a foreign language. Babylon had fallen. Fallen not in battle, but in silence, deceived and unprepared. Cyrus entered the city not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. He knew how important their god and king were to the conquered peoples. He declared that Babylon would have freedom of religion. He returned the statues of the gods that had been taken from other cities. He even allowed the Jews held in captivity to return to their homeland. This act of mercy was a brilliant political move. It demonstrated that Persian rule did not bring destruction, but only a change in order. But even under Persian rule, Babylon continued to thrive. It remained an important administrative center. Its canals and irrigation systems continued to function. Scholars and priests continued their research. Astronomical observations continued. And although its former political power was gone, the city retained its cultural significance. But time passed. Empires succeeded one another. After the Persians came the Greeks. Alexander the Great, the conqueror of the world, was enchanted by Babylon. He dreamed of making it the capital of his own vast empire. His sights fell on the Etemenanki ziggurat, the very one that may have given rise to the legend of the Tower of Babel. He even began work on its restoration. Imagine a great commander, having conquered half the world, standing at the foot of an ancient temple, dreaming of restoring its grandeur. But fate decreed otherwise. Alexander's life ended abruptly, leaving Babylon and his dreams in limbo. The city once again found itself at the center of a power struggle. The Seleucids, then the Parthians, and finally the Romans, all passed through these lands, leaving their mark. Babylon, which had once ruled over others, now became the object of foreign domination. The city's population changed, languages mingled. The city, once Akkadian and Sumerian-speaking, now heard Greek, Aramaic, and later other languages. But even as its political power waned, Babylon remained a center of knowledge and tradition. Its priests continued to study the stars, and its sages carefully preserved ancient texts. This period of changing dynasties and cultures was a time of trials, but also a time of adaptation. Babylon, like an old mighty tree that bends in the wind but does not break, endured these changes. It saw empires crumble, new kingdoms rise, gods and customs change. But it retained its essence, its spirit, its memory. It was a time when history, like a masterful weaver, wove together the threads of different nations, creating a new, more complex picture of the world. And in this picture, Babylon, even having lost its former dominance, continued to shine like a precious stone. It was a reminder of the greatness that could be achieved and the changes that were inevitable. But time passed. The decline that had begun with the weakening of central authority became irreversible. The Great Walls, once a symbol of impregnability, now seemed merely a reminder of the past. The Euphrates, which had once fed and protected the city, now flowed less fully. Water, the source of life, began to recede. The Romans, arriving from the west, saw Babylon as only a shadow of its former glory. It was no longer the center of the world, but just one of many cities on the outskirts of vast empires. Its population gradually declined. The great palaces and temples, once resplendent with splendor, began to decay. Astronomical observations, which had been conducted for centuries, gradually faded. The priests departed, taking their knowledge with them. But what was the final blow? Perhaps it was a shift in trade routes. Perhaps it was the gradual shift of population to newer, more prosperous cities. Or perhaps it was simply the natural decline, when the grandeur of the past becomes an unbearable burden for the present. The city, once the heart of civilization, slowly sank into oblivion. Its streets, once filled with thousands of people, were now deserted. The wind blew through the ruins, carrying the dust of centuries. The great walls, which had once inspired fear in their enemies, now crumbled, turning into piles of rubble. Babylon's last breath was silent. No roar of battle was heard, no cries of conquerors. There was only a slow decline, the quiet whisper of time. The city that had seen the birth and fall of empires, that had witnessed humanity's greatest achievements, gradually dissolved into the sands of history. But even in its decline, Babylon did not disappear completely. Its name lived on in legends, in tales, in the memories of peoples. Its wisdom, its knowledge, its architectural marvels, all left an indelible mark. The city, which seemed eternal, demonstrated that even greatness is subject to the passage of time. Imagine a sunset. The sun slowly sinks below the horizon, painting the sky in crimson hues. The light becomes softer, the shadows lengthen. So it was with Babylon. Its great radiance gradually faded, giving way to a new era. But this fading had its own special beauty, its own quiet sadness. Its last inhabitants, the few remaining, looked upon the ruins of their ancestors. They remembered tales of past glory, of golden times. But the reality was different. The city, once pulsating with life, now merely breathed quietly, preparing to pass into eternity. The air around was filled with the scent of dust and parched earth. Sometimes, when the wind blew from a certain direction, it seemed possible to hear a distant noise, a noise that could be an echo of the past, a reminiscence of the life that once flourished here. Footsteps, the clink of coins, the voices of merchants. But these were only ghosts of the past, shadows that wandered the deserted streets. The reality was harsher. Babylon, like a great shipwreck, was slowly sinking beneath the waves of time. Its majestic structures, once proudly towering above the horizon, were now mere piles of rubble swallowed by the sands. It's at moments like these that you realize the fragility of all things earthly. Even the most powerful states, the most grandiose cities, the greatest achievements, all are subject to the passage of time. Babylon was a shining example of this. The city that was once the center of the world is now nothing more than a desert where the wind plays with the debris of its former glory. But even in this desert, in these ruins, an echo remains, an echo of wisdom, an echo of culture, an echo of the life that once existed here. This echo will resound through the centuries, reminding us of Babylon, of its greatness, and of its fall. And this reminder is perhaps the most precious legacy the city has left us. Its final days were filled with silence and decay. The city, once a shining light on the world map, slowly sank into the darkness of oblivion. But this decline was not an end, but merely a transition. A transition to a different form of existence, to a different role in human history. And so when the last inhabitants abandoned its walls, when the last echoes of life faded, Babylon sank into a deep slumber, a slumber that lasted for centuries, awaiting its awakening, an awakening that would bring its story to us, to our time, so that we might hear its final breath and understand its eternal meaning. When Babylon sank into deep slumber, its history did not vanish without a trace. It merely lay dormant, like a seed awaiting its time beneath the earth's veil. Centuries passed, eras changed, and the memory of the great city gradually faded, turning into legend, an echo of a distant past. The dust of time covered its ruins, and the desert sands became its shroud. It seemed the earth itself had decided to conceal the traces of its former splendor, leaving only dim memories in tales and myths. But truth, like a precious stone buried beneath a thick layer of rock, always strives toward the light. And so in the mid-19th century, when the world stood on the threshold of new discoveries, humanity once again turned its gaze to the land of Mesopotamia. Archaeologists, like detectives, conducting the most important investigation, began their work. It was a time when the study of the past was taking its first tentative steps, when excavations were more of an adventure than a methodical investigation. Armed with shovels and faith in the power of human curiosity, the scientists set out to where, according to legend, Babylon once stood. The earth guarded its secrets carefully, and at first finds were few, as if nature was reluctant to part with its secrets so easily. But tenacity and a thirst for knowledge propelled these men forward through the scorching heat and the cool nights of the desert. Gradually, layer by layer, the earth began to reveal its treasures. These weren't just stones and shards. These were witnesses to eras, fragments of lives, silent storytellers of the past. The first discoveries were awe-inspiring. Here was a fragment of a clay tablet covered in cuneiform, like an ancient script encrypted by time. Here was a fragment of a wall, once adorned with glazed tiles, their vibrant colors faded but not completely lost. Each such find was a key, opening the door to another world, a world we knew only from fragmentary accounts. One of the first to uncover the secrets of Babylon was the French consul, Paul-Émile Botta. His expedition to Mesopotamia, which began in 1842, brought the world its first sensational discoveries. He worked in ancient Nineveh, and his findings, which included enormous bas-reliefs and royal libraries, captivated the entire scientific community. But the true heart of Babylon was still awaiting its time. A real breakthrough occurred when British expeditions, led by such eminent archaeologists as Henry Rawlinson and George Smith, began systematic excavations at the site of the ancient city. Rawlinson, a brilliant cryptographer, succeeded in deciphering the Behistun inscription, a crucial step toward understanding cuneiform. It was as if someone had discovered the key to an ancient language that had long remained silent. Now the texts found on clay tablets could be read, and they told stories of kings, gods, wars, and peaceful life. George Smith, in turn, made perhaps one of the most astonishing discoveries. Working with thousands of clay tablets from the library of Ashurbanipal, he discovered fragments of an ancient epic poem telling the story of the flood. This was a striking coincidence with the biblical story of Noah, and Smith's discovery caused a huge stir, forcing a rethinking of many ideas about ancient history and its connections. These tablets, like pages of a forgotten book, revealed a world full of myths, legends, and profound wisdom. Excavations in Babylon, particularly those begun by German archaeologists led by Robert Koldewey in the late 19th century, yielded truly monumental results. Koldewey, an experienced architect and archaeologist, approached the matter with incredible method. He didn't simply dig, he reconstructed a picture of the past in his mind, drawing on every detail he uncovered. His team uncovered the remains of magnificent structures previously known only from written sources. The Ishtar Gate, decorated with blue glazed tiles depicting bulls and dragons, was excavated. Like a portal to the past, this gate revealed the grandeur and skill of Babylonian craftsmen. It has been restored and now adorns the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, representing one of the most impressive exhibits ever discovered in Mesopotamia. The very fact that these vibrant, detailed images have survived for millennia is astounding. Remains of palaces, temples, and of course the famous ziggurat Etemenanki, believed to have inspired the biblical Tower of Babel, were also discovered. Imagine these enormous steps ascending to the sky, like a bridge between earth and the divine. Archaeologists have been able to determine its dimensions and approximate structure, although a full restoration is impossible. However, even its foundations and lower tiers give an idea of the scale of this grandiose structure. Furthermore, the remains of the so-called processional street were found, believed to have been used for ceremonial processions in honor of the gods. This wide road, decorated with the same blue glazed tiles, led to the temple of Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon. Walking along it, one could almost feel the footsteps of the ancient priests and kings and hear the sounds of religious hymns filling the air. Every clay tablet, every fragment of pottery, every brickwork, all of these were pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. Archaeological finds became more than just artifacts for us, but keys to understanding the lives of people who lived thousands of years ago. We learned about their beliefs, their customs, their laws, their science. We saw how they built their cities, how they farmed the land, how they lived and loved. These discoveries changed our understanding of the ancient world. Babylon was no longer just a mythical city from biblical stories. It took on flesh and blood, becoming a real, tangible place where the destinies of nations were decided. Archaeology gave us the opportunity to touch this reality, to see with our own eyes what previously existed only in the imagination. The significance of these discoveries is difficult to overstate. They have helped us understand how deeply rooted many aspects of our modern civilization are. The Babylonians made enormous contributions to the development of astronomy, mathematics, and law. Their counting systems, their calendars, their laws, all of this influenced subsequent cultures. For example, their profound knowledge of astronomy allowed them to create accurate lunar and solar calendars and predict eclipses. It was Babylonian astronomers who laid the foundations for many astronomical observations that are still used today. Their ideas about celestial bodies, their zodiac constellations, all of this has become part of our cultural heritage. In mathematics, they used the sexagesimal system, which still manifests itself today in our division of an hour into 60 minutes and a minute into 60 seconds. This system, so familiar to us, has its origins in ancient Babylon. Archaeological discoveries have also helped shed light on the social structure of Babylon and its legal system. The famous Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a basalt stele, is one of the earliest and most complete collections of laws to have survived. This code, with its principle of an eye for an eye, became a symbol of ancient justice and had a significant influence on the development of legal systems worldwide. Every discovered clay tablet, every wall fragment, every figurine, all bear the imprint of time, like a quiet whisper from the depths of time. Archaeologists, like translators, help us understand this whisper, hear the voices of those who lived long before us. They give us the opportunity not just to learn about Babylon, but to experience it, to imagine its life, its joys and its sorrows. These discoveries not only enriched our knowledge of the past, but also forced us to reflect on the eternal. They remind us that even the most powerful empires and the greatest cities eventually decline. But their legacy, their wisdom, their achievements can live on forever if we preserve their memory and pass it on from generation to generation. Babylon, once lost to oblivion, has returned to us thanks to the work of archaeologists. Its ruins, once seemingly mere shapeless heaps of stones, now tell us astonishing stories. They testify to the genius, the power, the grandeur, and also the fragility of human creation. And this knowledge, this understanding, is perhaps the most valuable thing we can glean from these ancient stones. Thus, through the painstaking work of researchers, through the depths of sand and time, the echo of Babylon has reached our days. It resonates in museums, in books, in our minds, reminding us that history is not simply a collection of dates and events, but a living thread connecting us to the past. And this thread, woven from discoveries and memories, continues to live on, enriching our present and illuminating our future. A change of era approaches like a breath of wind across the steppe. Babylon, ancient as time itself, has not vanished without a trace. It lives. It continues to breathe in our culture, in our imagination, in the very fabric of our collective consciousness. Its name, like an echo, carries through the millennia, evoking images of grandeur, wisdom, and, at times, fatal arrogance. Let us recall the ziggurats, those stepped temples reaching toward the heavens. Their silhouettes, even in ruins, continue to inspire, reminding us of man's desire to comprehend the divine, to touch the stars. These stone staircases leading upward have become a symbol of spiritual ascent, a bridge between the earthly and the heavenly. Their majestic silence speaks of the thousands of hands that labored in their creation, of the prayers that ascended to their summits, of the dreams that were dreamed beneath their shadow, and the hanging gardens. This legend, this image of paradise on earth, woven from greenery, flowers, and murmuring water, lives on in poems, paintings, and dreams. Imagine terraces entwined with vines where exotic plants whisper in a gentle breeze and cascades of water flow down, creating a cool, invigorating atmosphere in the heart of a hot city. Although the exact location and very existence of these gardens remain a subject of debate, their image has become firmly entrenched in global culture as a symbol of unattainable beauty, a metaphor for luxury and sophistication, and an embodiment of the human ability to transform nature, creating miracles. They have become a symbol of the fact that even in the harshest conditions, an oasis of life and beauty can be created. Babylonian astronomy, its observations of the movements of stars and planets, laid the foundation for future scientific discoveries. Cuneiform tablets containing precise calculations and predictions still amaze with their depth and precision. These ancient sages, looking at the night sky, saw not just twinkling dots, but a complex, orderly world full of patterns. Their work, their quest to understand celestial rhythms, was not simply an academic exercise, but a deeply spiritual quest, an attempt to find their place in the universe. They left us a map of the starry sky that, though changed over time, continues to guide us along the path of knowledge. This legacy, this knowledge, lives on, reminding us of our place among the stars and, of course, law. Babylonian laws, especially the famous Code of Hammurabi, became the foundation for many legal systems. The principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, though seemingly harsh, was a step toward establishing justice and order in society. It was an attempt to create a system where everyone knew their rights and responsibilities, where there was no room for arbitrariness. This ancient set of rules carved in stone became a testimony to how people tried to organize their lives and create a framework for coexistence. It reminds us that the desire for justice has been inherent in humanity since time immemorial. The language of Babylon, Akkadian, with its rich grammar and vocabulary, lives on in dialects and loanwords. Words, like seeds, spread throughout the world, taking root in other languages. Babylonian literature, epic poems, myths, and hymns inspire writers and poets, continuing to resonate in new forms. The Epic of Gilgamesh, this ancient literary monument, with its themes of friendship, loss, and the search for immortality, continues to touch the hearts of readers. It speaks to eternal human experiences, our fears and hopes, and the desire to leave a mark on this world. Images of Babylon permeate art. Its greatness and fall, its myths and legends, become the subjects of paintings, sculptures, and musical compositions. Artists inspired by ruins and stories attempt to recapture the spirit of this great city in their work. It appears before us in various guises, sometimes as a symbol of power and wealth, sometimes as a warning about the fragility of human achievement, sometimes as a mysterious place full of enigmas. And in our dreams, in our fantasies, Babylon lives on. It becomes the setting for novels, films, and computer games. It's a city that beckons with its antiquity, its mystery, its legendary status. It appears to us as a portal to the past, an opportunity to touch something great and forgotten. It's not just a city, it's an entire universe in which history, myth, and reality intertwine. Even the word Babylon has become a byword. It signifies a confusion of languages, chaos, but also grandeur and immensity. This word bears the imprint of centuries of history, echoes of both grandeur and tragedy. It reminds us of how complex and multifaceted this ancient state was. Babylon, having survived the centuries, has not disappeared. It has transformed, becoming part of our culture, our collective experience. Its legacy lives on, enriching our world, reminding us of the power of the human spirit, the desire for knowledge, eternal beauty, and the inevitability of change. It remains an eternal source of inspiration, a riddle we continue to unravel, an echo we hear through the roar of time. It breathes in every line of ancient text, in every brushstroke, in every note of music, in our every aspiration to greatness. It lives because we remember, and as long as we remember, Babylon will live. Its light, its shadow, its wisdom, all this continues to illuminate our path. The sands of time settle on ancient bricks, carrying away the last echoes of former grandeur. Where ziggurats once towered, now only hills remain, guarding the secrets of millennia. The wind sweeping over the parched plain whispers forgotten names, carrying them into the boundless sea of oblivion. But in the silence of the desert, beneath the bottomless dome of the sky, something elusive dwells. It is memory, woven from sunbeams, shadows, and the dust of centuries. The city that was the heart of the world now rests in the embrace of the earth. Its walls, once impregnable, have turned to dust. Its streets, where kings and merchants trod, are now mere footprints in the sand, erased with each passing day by time. But even this piece has its own melody, its own eternal song. It resounds in the rustling of grasses pushing through cracks in the stones, in the cries of birds soaring above the ruins, in the measured breath of night enveloping the ancient lands. Babylon hasn't disappeared, it has been transformed. Its spirit lingers in every stone, every shard of clay lifted from the earth. It lives in legends passed from mouth to mouth, in dreams that fuel the imagination. It's not just history, it's a continuation of life, a different course. The city that witnessed the rise and fall of empires has now itself become part of the eternal cycle. Imagine a quiet sunset over the Euphrates when the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in golden pink hues. The surface of the water reflects this splendor, creating the illusion of another world, a world where time stands still. It is in such moments that you can feel the breath of antiquity touching what has survived the centuries. It is not a loud fanfare, but a quiet, profound peace. Like a seed falling into the earth, Babylon gave birth to new shoots. Its wisdom, its discoveries, its mistakes, all have become part of our shared journey. We draw from this legacy, learn from it, and strive to surpass it. The city that once embodied the pinnacle of human achievement now serves as a perpetual reminder of the cyclical nature of all things. Let the last echoes of the past drift away, dissolving in the evening air. Let the wind rustle the hems of the ancient garments we wore when we built temples and waged wars. Now comes a time of peace, a time of reflection. The city's history, so vibrant and eventful, is coming to its natural conclusion. This is not a tragedy, but a harmony. Like the final chord of a majestic symphony, the echoes of Babylon fade away. But in this silence, something else resounds, something eternal. It is the melody of memory, the melody of life that continues. It is a song sung by the earth itself, preserving the traces of all who lived before us. And this melody will always resound as long as we remember, as long as we listen. It is the eternal song of an ancient city, gone but not forgotten. It resounds in our hearts like the quiet whisper of eternity.